Deirdre Bolton, and Executive Director at America Rising PAC, Alexandra Smith. Alexandra, let's start with you. I just had this conversation with Sarah, and she's saying that all of this chaos is distracting from President Trump's agenda and his success. But I put a lot of this on the media deciding what it wants to talk about and what it doesn't want to talk about. For instance, Friday, this amazing jobs report really wasn't a jobs report. As we were talking about it, I looked at all these screens and I saw only things about Stormy Daniels and saying, come on, one thing impacts every single American and really matters, and the other one really doesn't.
Sure. I mean, I think that on cable news and in different media outlets, the palace intrigue stories always do well. That's what people want to talk about. But when I go home and talk to relatives and talk to other people, that's not the kind of things that they're talking about. And so I think that absolutely there's a disparity between what's being spoken about in the media and what voters are actually
When you go home,
about.
what are they talking about?
I think they're talking about tax reform. They're talking about the fact that they're seeing more money in their paychecks, and they're excited by the economic growth that's happening under this president and the Republicans in Congress.
I think that's what most people are feeling.
Yeah, and the president
about.
Just made a very funny joke, right, with the Friends of Ireland. You know,
everything but trade.
Everything but trade, everything but taxes, because you have them pretty low. They're at 13% corporate tax rate, and that's a lot of the reason why the president was trying to get our corporate tax rate lower, is because a lot of our tech companies were going to Dublin, setting up shop, saying, hey, this is our headquarters. So I like the little comedic stylings at the end. But
although
the
realistically, they were renting like a room inside a building, right? I think one building had 29, headquarters or whatever.
No, but legitimate. They did have workers, but much fewer than here. And 13% is a lot more agreeable to pay than our former tax rate for corporations, which was 35%. So to your point, certainly taxes.
EU coming out perhaps, and this is your beat, but looking at special taxes on these big tech names, in part, I think, to get that 3% tax. Maybe we could talk about that later at some point. But the so-called chaos, Connell. Listen. Maybe it does, catch eyeballs, and maybe it's good clickbait. But I think there's a nefarious aspect to it as well.
Some weeks more than others. I mean, I think some weeks are truly chaotic, and some weeks are exaggerated, to use the president's term from earlier. But Sarah Westwood, who was on with you earlier, did hit on a key point. Some of this is managing it from the White House's point of view, and at times I think she's right that they have not done the best job of managing that in terms of if you want to control a news cycle, to use our terminology, that maybe you want to avoid making an announcement or a tweet at a certain time and keep those things in control. I just got back from Pennsylvania and covering that special election race out there, and the president, which is one of the things that I find interesting, because I think maybe people are overreading this race and the result of it. The president's still very popular in that particular district in Pennsylvania, at least from the people I'm speaking to, and I think the polls pretty much bear that out. But Conor Lamb went and won that district, and he did it by being a different type of a candidate, but not necessarily by capitalizing on some sort of sentiment that is now anti-Trump that had been pro-Trump. So a lot of these things, to your point, do get kind of overplayed a little bit. But at the same time, there have been some weeks like we've never seen in terms of staff changes, and you forget what happened on Monday by the time you get to Friday.
There's no doubt about that. The so-called news cycle is it's not 24 hours. You can measure it before in days, and you measure it in minutes. But again, we never had a businessman in the White House. And we saw this even on the campaign trail, President Trump making command decisions very swiftly, and ultimately it worked out for him. And Pennsylvania, again, people are talking about that election and that election outcome, but I'm not so sure it was a referendum on the president.
Well, I don't think it was either, because if you look at the number of votes that Rick Saccone got vis-a-vis Trump's votes in 2016, he got much fewer votes than Trump did, actually. But I think that PA-18 is absolutely a huge wake-up call for Republicans. I think that
what will they do different?
Well, look, I mean, it was easy to get complacent after 2016, the surprise victory, and then just sort of the unending Hillary tour of excuses. But then
will they move closer to President Trump or further from President Trump?
Well, I think that the one thing you really have to account for is renewed Democratic enthusiasm. There's a real grassroots effort out there that's excited, that wants to be involved and is mobilized, and they certainly did so in PA 18.
Yeah, come down to it always comes down to candidates, but I think there is something to that in Pennsylvania 18 that we really learned, is that Conor Lamb was a good candidate for that district, and even though the president won it by 20 points, I spoke to a woman there yesterday, for example, who was out and said that he was a better candidate. It's a simple way of saying it, but he was a better candidate in this district than Hillary Clinton was in 2016. Simple as that. So he won back voters that might have been registered and trended towards the Democratic Party for years, then didn't want to vote for Hillary Clinton.
A charismatic former Marine, prosecutor, pro-guns, anti-abortion, pro-tariffs. I mean, he spoke the Trump language for sure.
Yeah, and even House Speaker Paul Ryan saying, like, listen, this guy is a unicorn, but also admitting that it does need to be.
Well, there might be more candidates tailored to districts if the Democrats are smart about it.
I don't know if they. Sorry, I don't know if they can necessarily get there because you have, like I said, this mobilized Democratic enthusiasm, but at the same time, it's pushing the party to the progressive wings. Look in Texas, where the DCCC intervened against a Bernie Sanders, backed candidate. Now they're left with a Bernie Sanders candidate and a candidate that they're now backing that is opposed by the union.
I just think there's a lot of blurred lines, right? President Trump appealed to a lot of independents and a lot of people who sometimes even would have voted for sort of a middle.
And maybe we're just looking too deeply into this one unique situation because Conor Lamb was a unique candidate. Thank you all very much.